Has this ever happened to you?
It's got to roll initiative here. No.
Then you should try this video. With these helpful tips, you'll be able to design fun 5th edition combat with ease. Say goodbye to the slog, the slaughter, the mundane encounter, and say hello to fresh and fun encounters for the whole family to enjoy. And it could all be yours for 5 low payments of... It's free.
I did this for free. I did this for free because I spend my time wisely. Combat can be a gosh dang great time. Nat 20s, epic battles, tense and life-threatening action, but it can also be a bit dull sometimes. It takes a long time, it can feel repetitive, it can feel pointless or counterintuitive. So today I'm going to give you some tips on how to run exciting, fun combat. This video consists of a bunch of lessons I've learned throughout my own time playing and running 5th edition. So if some of these lessons aren't crunchy or chewy enough for you, that's okay. We all have our own way of doing things. So first let's talk about time. Combat takes a long time. The average encounter takes anywhere from 1 to 2 hours. I don't think I'm alone in saying that I've had encounters where as a player, I'm sitting and waiting for my turn for ungodly lengths of time. Considering this is a game I do for fun. And I'm pretty patient when it comes to games. I just sit there and listen, no phone out or anything, just waiting as if being a good boy makes time go faster. It doesn't. So let's first try to talk about where this isn't much of a problem. And that's from about 1st to 4th level. But then, we get to 5th level. We then have opened the can of combat worms, and now all of them can attack twice or cast Fireball. And that's great. 5th level is one of the most substantial levels of the game. But now everything takes twice as long. There are many more rolls to make. What you're left with is a whole lot of clutter. Time! Clutter. Not only from the PCs, but for your NPCs too. Many of the bad guys the party will be fighting by this point will have multi-attack, or other abilities that affect multiple creatures. When it comes to NPCs, you shouldn't have to take as much time for a monster's turn as you would a player's. The monsters aren't sitting at the table patiently waiting for their turns. There are a few things you can do to reduce clutter. First, you should take all your goons and just lump them together. If you have a big fight with a bunch of smaller enemies in it, try combining some of their turns so you don't have to keep jumping around from monster to monster on the initiative. I wouldn't do this all the time, but if your encounter has more than 5 non-player turns, you should consider it. Second, you can minimize the amount of friendly NPCs in the combat. You can't always help having an NPC traveling with the party, but you can try to create situations where there aren't a lot of NPCs in the actual encounter. My recommendation is you only have less than 2 friendly NPCs in a given combat. I also see a lot of DMs using character sheets for NPCs, and that's fine. But when you're also juggling 1,000 other things as a DM, frequently flipping through character sheets is not going to help you. D&D Beyond lets you create monster stat blocks by copying existing monsters. Use that instead. It's super easy. It would also help to keep friendly NPCs' turns small and simple. No more than 2 attacks, no area of effect spells, no crazy reactions or passive abilities. All of these big boy moves take time. But that doesn't mean your NPCs can't be badass. They can be stronger than the party. All you need to do is to reduce the number of attacks and saving throws that you have to make on an NPC's turn, but keep the damage the same. And remember, NPCs don't have to have a class or follow character levels. You can mix and match as much as you feel comfortable with. Last but not least, in those large combat scenarios when there are more than 10 combatants, you may want to consider finding opportunities to run some NPC turns while the player is deciding what to do. I would only skip ahead like this for creatures that are the least likely to be affected by the player's turn, like friends and foes that are far away or focus on different targets. So, while the wizard is picking their spells, I get to play with my action figures a bit in the corner, so I don't take up the time from the table, doing that while everybody's waiting on me. Battles involving only NPCs can be interesting sometimes, but 9 times out of 10, it's not what the players come back to the table for. So I'd avoid them if you can. So it's nice to be able to shear off some combat time. Pardon me. It's nice to be able to shear off some combat time with combat design. But then you reach a point that you can't prepare for. Because eventually, it gets to your players' turns. You know, the other people that are required to play this game. Player turns can take a long time. I've heard of DMs putting a timer on player turns. And I think in most cases that's probably the wrong approach. Most players probably already feel rushed when it comes to their turns. However, you could talk to your players about their priorities when they're waiting. Each player should consider their next turn before it gets there. They don't necessarily have to know exactly what they're going to do, because sometimes things change in the last minute, but it would help for them to have at most 2 options of what they might do on their turn when it gets to them. But perhaps your players are new and don't know the game or their classes well enough to decide quickly. In that case, I'd suggest having a test combat to get them familiar, one where you can freely advise them on their character's features without wasting the table's time. As the last note on time. Double up your die rolls. Roll 2 d20s at the same time for advantage and disadvantage. Combine your damage rolls when it doesn't seem like the enemy will die yet. It speeds up everything a bunch. Now, let's take a step back and talk about turns. Players get around 2 to 6 turns in a given combat, so, get them while they're hot. Or else you've just spent 10 minutes or more waiting to cool off a goblin with a stiff breeze. Or if you're like me, you've spent far too much time thinking about your character and making them just right so you can get into combat and have this one cool thing happen and fuck. I'm stunned. GG guys, see you next week. Enemy number 1 of engaging combat is missing. It's a crucial part of game balance, so it needs to be there in some capacity, just like you need to pay taxes. But I for one believe that missing should only be common enough to make hitting enjoyable. You could make missing more rare pretty easily by just giving your monsters a lower AC, but more hit points. It just feels better to hit things than to miss. I don't care if I hit this guy and he doesn't even flinch. I just want to roll my dice and do my cool stuff. Just don't go too low on AC, or else they come. In the same line as missing, it sucks when your spell fails because the guy has advantage on magic saves or just is a dragon. So to combat this, you could be a bit more generous in giving your monsters legendary resistances. A creature can use a legendary resistance to turn a failed saving throw into a success. This can make creatures more resistant to spells, but only while they have resistances left. So then when your player's spell fails because of a legendary resistance, at least they got through one, and eventually the creature will run out. And then you will strike. You could also mess around with the rules for called shots and such to reduce your monster's AC. Give them shields or armor plating that increase their AC to what it would be otherwise. Then when a character removes the shield or damages the armor enough, the monster's AC drops. There's a lot you can do. Don't be afraid to just give inspiration to a character who is having a rough time. I'm a firm believer that mechanics that skip your turn in all sorts of gaming scenarios are not great design. And I'm not sure why turn skipping is so common in games. It's like they were making the game and said, hey, what if in this game a thing could happen to you that just, keeps you from playing it? What if you just, couldn't play for a minute? Wouldn't that be fun? So what are we to do when the monster manual gives us these monsters that use the paralyzed or stunned conditions that take away your entire turn in most cases? Well, we change it. I present to you the slowed condition. A slowed creature has its speed halved and can only take an action or bonus action on its turn, not both. Attacks against the creature have advantage, and a creature has disadvantage on dexterity saving throws. The creature can't make more than one melee or ranged attack this turn. If the creature attempts to cast a spell of first level or higher, with a casting time of 1 action, the spell does not take effect until its next turn, and the creature must use its action on its turn to complete the spell. If it can't, the spell is wasted.
Thanks for watching.
Yes, that's a lot, and that's a lot to remember, but it's also better than being stunned or paralyzed. Overall, the slowed condition is still a major debuff, but it still lets you do something on your turn. You could even slap the restrained condition right on top of that without too much trouble, if you want even more restriction. So that takes care of the stunned and paralyzed conditions, but there's still one more major condition that causes you to be incapacitated. And this one's a bit tough. The unconscious condition means you're unconscious. It happens when you're sleeping or when you think the barbarian won't notice that you're stealing their food. There's not much you can do about it, but here's a thing that can make it slightly more bearable. Death's Door. Death's Door is my little inclusion to the rules of dying in D&D to hopefully make things a little bit more dramatic and a little less dreadful. When you are reduced to 0 hit points, you can attempt a DC 15 Constitution saving throw. On a successful save, you do not fall unconscious. Instead, you are at death's door until you regain at least 1 hit point. While at death's door, you are slowed and have disadvantage on attack rolls and ability checks. While at death's door, you continue to make death saving throws as normal. If you succeed 3 death saves while at death's door, you regain 1 hit point. Wouldn't it just be cooler to die fighting instead of bleeding out on the ground? Death's door is dangerous though, because if your PCs are conscious, monsters still may want to attack them. So if you use it, your players may want to think twice before attempting the save. It may just be safer to lay on the ground. Above all, remember that slogs happen sometimes. Hopefully these tips help, but don't get too down if you have a slow or unsatisfying combat from time to time. Every encounter is different, variety in the gameplay means that there's bound to be a few duds, and with the dice involved, sometimes there's little you can do but recover and keep going. And that, folks, is how to make combat more fun. Thanks for watching. Keep a lookout for part 2 when I cover terrain, obstacles, and the context of your combat. Big thanks to Sadie for her art. Find her stuff in the description. So long.
Time!